about all these ranges that you set. I've seen them. I know you've seen a whole bunch of them. What would you tell our local clubs? You know, if they've got trees, I tell them put them in the trees as long as it's safe. Give them a real brief description on how to lay out an ASA range if it was going to look like a pro-am. You know, what would they use terrain wise?
Yeah, both of you guys have shot pro-ams. Both of you shot on a federation level as well. When we set a course, there's times you're going to walk out to a target. Neil, I know you've experienced it in the last year or two, but you walk out on a range and you walk up to a target, and it is a wide open lane, and the target's out there at 40 yards. There's sometimes they're just going to be just wide open. There's nothing to, but if you got areas that you can use the terrain, you can use trees, you can use the hill or the hump or a hole. That's what we try to look for. We're not trying to make anyone miss by no means. That's not the point. I want everybody out there that sets targets on a federation level. If you're a club, whether you're in the ASA or not, understand one thing: we should never set targets to try and make individual miss. That's not what we're about. What we're doing though, we want it to be challenging. Even because you have unknown shooters and known shooters. Unknown guys, the challenging, it's not quite so hard sometimes setting it for them to make it challenging because, I can set it over a hill, behind a tree, in between trees. Sometimes it makes it difficult for them to judge. If you take away the ground, what I mean by taking away the ground is that you can't see the bottom half of the target's legs at all. That's kind of hard to judge sometimes. But for the known guys, you're like, well, how can you really make it challenging for them? Well, you can, because you start putting obstacles that are in that peripheral vision. Sometimes that's a mental thing. That gets you up here, and you're like, if you got it in between two trees. Now, when you do it in between two trees, every bit of the score ring has to be visible. It may be on the very edge of the 8 line and very edge of the 8 line. But when those trees are there, that's sometimes that can be a visual block. That can be something that, a lot of shooters have to learn to deal with, but it makes them better shooters and it's more challenging for them. So I suggest setting targets using everything that is available for you to make a challenging course, with keeping in mind that we don't set to make them miss. That's not the goal, is to make someone miss. It's just to make it challenging. And when you set a course, a 20 target course, and you're in the federation, and I set them here at my place. I run a place called River Bottom Outdoors. We do target tournaments once a month, and I've been doing them here since 2011, actually 2010. So it's difficult for me to set 20 targets without doing the same thing, because I've been doing them for so long. So I always try to mix it up. I try to find new lanes, but I keep notes of what targets sometimes that I put where, so that when we have to use that same range or the same lanes, we don't put the same target in that same lane. But yeah, just, we set them, 20 targets, you're going to set 4 or 5 of them at the max. And then we just come back down 4 or 5, 3 or 4 yards less than that, 4 or 5, 3 yards, something like that. So I suggest, like I say, have fun setting. If you're not having fun setting targets, if it's a job or it's a pain in the butt for you, you probably don't need to do it.
So your definition is fun is when you put a 5-yard target out there for the guys, is to stand at the stake and watch the first group walk up to it.
Well, now, that 5-yard target could be just because, we were tired that day. Well, we didn't feel like, we didn't really want to walk.
I've seen Scott make the rounds on the range on Friday or Saturday and admire his handiwork. And usually it's judged by the damage to people's egos, emotions, psyches. It's like the last thing I was thinking is you got 1.5 feet to sneak that arrow through those trees. You can see every bit of it. Don't hit that tree. And the only thing I'm still wondering is which tree I hit. But, you'll bank an arrow off there. But I tell people about the ASA. They're clean-faced targets. all the 8 ring has to be visible. This is not a competition as to whether or not you can hit the target. It's a competition as to where you can hit the target, and that's based on that upper and lower scoring rings there. Your bonus rings are at the outside of the 10 ring, if anybody out there hasn't seen it. So there's plenty of strategy and competition here, not so much landing the arrow in the target, but where you're scoring it on. That's a kind of a big tell people all the time.
It is, and we put we put quite a few targets quartering. Now we don't really do a real, sometimes we're really sharp quartering, but we do put a little bit of quartering because both of you shot competition. You both understand that a lot of times if you walk up to an animal and if it can appear to be perfectly broadside, but he's quartering and you shoot, that can throw you off in half an inch. And a half an inch is, instead of being a 12, now you could be an 8.
Now, Scott, do you mean quartering away?
Yes, we never, ever quarter an animal toward the shooter. Never.
Thank you for that. We had that clarification a couple times last year, and it's like, quartering away only. So for everybody out there,
and if there's anyone listening and they're a club and they set targets, you'd be surprised at how many targets are actually quartered to you a little bit because they think they're perfectly broadside. What I suggest doing is getting them where everyone, most of the time, they think it's perfectly broadside, and then bring the rear of the target toward the shooter 2 inches, 3 inches. Generally, that really sets it off straight across, perfectly broadside. But sometimes we go a little more than that. We'll quarter one, and it's all about the competition as far as shooters competing against themselves. I'm not worried about where if Neil's trying to get out there and compete against 80 other guys. I want to set a range so that when Neil walks out there and shoots that course, he's competing against himself to shoot the best that he's ever shot.